Welcome back to the PoiseCast channel. With 30 days left in the year, let's talk about how do we focus and simplify our goal setting. What's that saying? If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. With 30 days left in the year and another decade fastly approaching, goal setting will get you focused and targeted. Our conversation today won't just be about goal setting. We'll balance the conversation with celebrating our wins no matter how big or small, even if we fail. Now, if this is your first time to the PoiseCast channel, welcome. This channel was created in order to awaken that inner voice in you to find the things that'll bring you joy. Now, let's get into our discussion about goal setting. So goal setting is the process of deciding what you want to accomplish and devising a plan to achieve the result that you desire. Now, goal setting can be extremely overwhelming. So how can you make goal setting work for you and your own personal life? One of the first things I do when I start to do goal setting is brain dumping. So brain dumping is the process of getting all of the thoughts that you have in your head so you're able to focus on one thing at a time. So now that you've done your brain dump, you can prioritize your goals. So we talked about the process of brain dumping. Remember, brain dumping is taking all of the things that you have in your brain and just throwing them on a board. You could do it on a whiteboard, you could do it on a sticky. Now that you've done that, and we've talked about that, remember, you cannot take on everything. I typically try to break out my brain dumping into kind of three key buckets: personally, professionally, and then whatever I want to do for my health. Now, in order for me to kind of synthesize all of this information that I've processed in my head and I've brain dumped it and I categorized it, then I try to ask myself some very poignant questions that I've been asking myself for a couple years. I read it in a book about goal setting maybe a few years ago, and I've used it as kind of a filter to help me figure out where I should be going. Because like I mentioned before, remember, you cannot take on everything. So key questions you want to think about when you're asking yourself about your goals is this goal the most important thing to me? Will it improve those three buckets that you're thinking about? Your mental, your physical, or your financial well-being? Is this goal even realistic? Because sometimes we have these very lofty goals, but we have to think about the time, the place, the situation that we're in. Do we have the resources to be able to do that? So in order for you to have to think about that, you have to say, is this goal for me really realistic for where I am personally in my life? Now, does this goal align with your long-term plan? My brother and I always have this conversation around focusing on the long game. And sometimes people want to focus on the short game or the short result. When I focus on the long game, I have that big lofty goal. So I have this big plan for myself that I want to achieve in 10 years. Then I try to back my way into that. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but I back my way into my goals. So does whatever goal that you are trying to obtain today, does this tie to the long-term plan that you're trying to achieve for yourself? And I think if you ask yourself those following questions, it really helps you narrow down your goals. Because oftentimes, as I mentioned previously, your goals can be so overwhelming. And that's why some people don't like goals. And I know everything I talked about seems so structured, seems so Pollyanna, but I will tell you, you have to have something that'll help you achieve whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. It's okay to have goals for yourself, no matter how big or no matter how small, but you have to put some structure around it because it helps you stay focused and targeted. If you don't really have no structure around the things that you're trying to accomplish, then you're just going to be out there in the dream world, not really thinking about things that you may want to do for yourself. And then when you kind of synthesize it and you put some structure around it, not over-engineer it, but put some structure around it, then it makes you feel like you can actually achieve the things that you're trying to be successful at. So we've already done our brain dump. We've already put our goals into kind of three categories. We've already tried to ask ourselves those really important questions around our goals. Now let's take them and narrow them down even more. Now, the way that a lot of people like to do their goals is like they try to do SMART goals. So SMART goals is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's realistic, and it's time bound. So what happens is, now that you've broken out your goals into these 3 categories or 3 buckets, now you can figure out, okay, now that I have them in each one of these buckets, and you don't need to have goals in all of these buckets. Let me just make sure that I'm clear. But if you break them down and then you kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do in a month? What am I going to do in a year? What am I going to do 10 years from now? Is this really achievable to my long-term plan? All of those things. So that's what helps you. Remember, I was talking about putting some structure around the things that you're trying to accomplish for yourself. Remember, I talked a little bit about back myself into the goal. So I usually like to start with a broad goal, and then I like to break that broad goal into small little action steps, kind of using that SMART process, right? So say, for example, in 10 years, I want to be able to pay off $50,000 worth of debt. So the $50,000 worth of debt is the broad goal. I've asked myself all those important questions. Is this goal important to me? Yes, it is, because it's important to improve my financial health. Then I ask myself, is this goal realistic? Maybe it is, depending on your financial income. I just threw out $50,000 because I don't know why, but I just threw out $50,000. So say, for example, it's a realistic goal for me and where I am financially in my life. And it does tie to my long-term plan, because my long-term plan is that I want to own a beach home. And in order for me to be able to own a beach home, which is to my law, I have to get my financial well-being in check. And one of those things that'll help that process is being able to pay off of my student loans. So my broad goal is paying off my student loans in 10 years of $50,000. And now I'm going to back into those goals. So the specific goal is paying off my student loans in 10 years. That's the specific goal. So now I'm going to think about measurable. So one of the first steps you want to do is take that broad goal that you have, and now that you've done it specifically and you've broken it into chunks. So say, for example, you take $50,000 and then you divide it into 10, and you try to figure out, okay, how much do I need to pay annually? How much do I need to pay monthly? How much do I need to pay weekly? Whatever. That's how you back into that and make it measurable for yourself. Because if you put $50,000 out there and then you don't have a way to figure out how you're going to pay for that, whether it be changing your expenses or doing your budget differently, then you're just putting out a goal that you may not be able to achieve. And then in 10 years, when you're frustrated with yourself because you don't know why you haven't obtained that goal, it's because you've taken such a broad goal and you haven't backed into it, and you haven't made it specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, or time-bound. So now that we have talked about the goal setting process and we've talked about how we're going to check in for ourselves, one of the things that oftentimes are missed in the goal setting process is having an accountability partner, someone that you know that is going to hold you accountable for the things that you're trying to achieve for yourself. That could be anyone in your life that you know, that you trust, that you know is going to hold you accountable. So if your goal is to have a very tight budget, having someone that you know that you can trust, that's going to hold you accountable so don't you overspend, or that's going to challenge you and say, hey, if we do X, are you sure that's going to not impact your budget? Or they're not going to coerce you to go out if they know that you are trying to achieve something financially for yourself. So having an accountability partner is super important. One of the other things that I like to do around kind of keeping myself in check is that not only do I like to manifest the things that I'm trying to do, I also 100% believe in vision boards. I've been doing vision boards for years. I 100% believe in them. I think that they really work, but I also think that sometimes they can be overwhelming to people as well. So how you set your vision board up is the same way of how you set your goals up. Now, when you're thinking about all the things that you're trying to achieve for yourself, whether it's just like, I have student loan debt as a goal that I'm trying to achieve honestly for myself in the next 10 years, then what I do is I typically like to put a dollar sign and put student loan debt and put that on my vision board. So I know that whatever I'm trying to achieve, that it has to tie to my long-term plan. Talked about how do you do your brain dump. Then we talked about how do we put some structure around that. And then we talked about how do we make sure that the goal that we're trying to achieve is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable and realistic, and it's time bound. The last piece of it that I think is the most critical piece that I think often gets lost in the process when you're trying to do any type of goals for yourself is that most people don't do any follow-ups or do any check-ins with yourself. Me, I'm the type of person that I like to do quarterly check-ins. And the reason why I like to do quarterly check-ins because it's a 90-day rolling kind of reminder. I'm very, like I told you guys, I'm a little type A, very, very structured person that I have to put reminders on my calendar. So I know that I'm usually the type of person that works from home on Fridays. And I always have built into my schedule a block of time for me to do brainstorming for work or to do brainstorming for myself or just to have some downtime at the end of the week. And I usually use that time as a way to check in. The reason why I like quarterly check-ins, because it gives you enough time to see whatever plan you've put in place is working, but then it also gives you enough time that if it hasn't worked, that you're able to make some good pivots quickly. So say, for example, like we talked about, the $50,000 paying off the student loan in 10 years is the long-term broad goal. And we've broken that goal off into an annual basis, and then we've broken it down into a monthly basis so we can figure out how much do we need to be putting towards this big lofty goal in order to achieve it. So if I'm looking at my targeted schedule on a quarterly basis, that gives me enough time that if my car breaks down or if I acquire medical bills or whatever shifts in my life financially, then I'm able to make those shifts quickly and go back and restructure how I want my goal to be achieved. Now, I talked a little bit about all of these things to help you stay structured. I think the one thing too that can be missed in all of this is that sometimes you're going to hit your goals 100% of the time, but most times you're going to fail. Sometimes you're going to miss the mark. Sometimes shifts happen in your life. It's okay. Forgive yourself and just move on. I see this a lot of times when people are trying to lose weight or when people are trying to save money. They feel like they're so tied to these goals that they can't have extra ice cream or they can't treat themselves to something nice. That's not what it is. It's okay to fail. I would say fail fast, fail often, because it helps you figure out what are the things that you need to do for yourself in order to continue to stay on the path that you want to. But the number one thing that you have to do when you're trying to achieve these goals is that forgive yourself. Forgive yourself if you miss the mark. It may not be the time, and that is okay. So before we wrap up, let's recap everything we talked about. We talked about the value of goal setting and what is goal setting. We talked about how do we set our goals up by doing a brain dump. We talked about how do we make sure that we put some structure around our goals. We also talked about how do we hold ourselves accountable? How do we do check-ins with ourselves? We also talked about having an accountability buddy as well. And lastly, we talked about that it's okay to fail and that it's okay for us not to achieve our goals. And sometimes we need to just recognize that and be self-aware to just regroup and just move on when we haven't done something that we've needed to accomplish, and it's okay. So before I wrap up, I will leave you with a quote from Bruce Lee because I am a quote queen. I love everything about quotes. I try to read quotes every single day because it helps me stay focused and targeted, like I've mentioned before. So sometimes goals are not always meant to be reached. Sometimes it's something just for you to aim at. And that is a quote from Bruce Lee. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to the Poisecast channel. Please follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Please subscribe and share our content with other people. I hope the information that we share is useful and valuable to you to bring you some knowledge, also to help you figure out what shifts and pivots that you need to make in your own personal life to be set up for success, and not just to be set up for success, but just to find peace and joy in whatever it is that you're trying to do, no matter what. All right, everybody, it was great to connect with you again, and we'll talk soon.